Okay, welcome everybody. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Welcome to the Center for Brooklyn History. My name is Marsha Eli, spelled M-A-R-C-I-A. Uh, and on behalf of everyone here at the center and our colleagues at the Brooklyn Public Library and the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents, welcome and happy LGBTQ plus History Month. Yeah, tonight we are so excited, beyond excited, to host Tourmaline in a conversation about her newest book, Marsha. Yeah. It is the first definitive biography of the revolutionary Black trans activist Marsha P. Johnson. The book was named a national bestseller, received a starred review from Publishers Weekly, and was selected by the New York Times for its nonfiction spring book preview. I am also beyond excited to welcome back to CBH Hugh Ryan. Yes. A really longtime friend here. Hugh curated our 2019 exhibition, A Queer Look at Brooklyn, which was inspired by his book, When Brooklyn Was Queer. So I want to let you know that after their conversation, we'll have time to take a few questions from all of you. Our ushers will bring a mic to you in your seats. Please help out by standing when you speak and keeping your questions as brief as possible. And of course, we have both Marsha and When Brooklyn Was Queer available at the CBH shop, which you probably saw and passed as you walked in that corner. We'll scoot Tourmaline and Hugh to the table at the front, if you let me, after the program where they'll be signing. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about each of these amazing guests and turn it over to them. Tourmaline is an artist, filmmaker, Guggenheim Fellow, Time 100 honoree, national best-selling author, creator of trans-inclusive swimwear lines, activist, inspiration. Her art is in the permanent collections of the Met, MoMA, Tate, and Whitney. Her award-winning films, including Happy Birthday, Marsha, Salacia, Atlantic is a Sea of Bones, Mary of Ill Fame, are widely acclaimed for blending historical narrative and speculative futurism. I'm not telling you anything you don't know when I say that hers is a transformative voice for trans liberation and more broadly for the movements for racial, economic, and gender justice. It's such an honor to host you here. Hugh Ryan. Hugh is an award-winning historian, the author of The Women's House of Detention and When Brooklyn Was Queer, and co-host with Peppermint of the Queer History 101 Book Club for Alstora. He teaches creative nonfiction in the Bennington Writing Seminars, MFA, and has a new book coming out himself next year, so a little tease on that. Anyway, it's always a happy day when you're in the building, Hugh. So without any further ado, please help me welcome Tourmaline and Hugh Ryan.
Is this? Oh, good. It is. Yay.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Yes.
It means a lot to be in Brooklyn.
This is a great crowd, and we're so excited. This is such an honor to be talking to you. I think this now marks a full decade of me interviewing you about Marsha,
Yeah.
and that is like an honor and a gift because I feel like I learned so much every single time. To give you all a little rundown of how we're going to do tonight, we're going to start with Tourmaline doing a quick reading from the book, which if you don't already own it, it's for sale. This is your chance to get it signed. I don't know why you don't own it, so just make sure. This is going to give you a little taste. Then we'll go into some slides to kind of ground us in Marsha herself. We're going to do some questions. We've got a couple little audio surprises we're going to play for you, and then we'll leave some room for questions from you all at the end. So take notes if you need to. We won't mind if you take out your phones. With that said, do you want to start us?
Yeah. So I'm going to read from the Star chapter. It's about a year after the Stonewall Uprising in New York City at New York University, when Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, and Dora Bubbles all head over to NYU for an occupation because NYU refused to allow for queer life at the university, and also because they were running Bellevue, a psychiatric ward where trans and gender nonconforming people, LGBTQ people in general, were being held against their will. And so Sylvia and Marsha, just like many of us in this room, faced these harsh conditions with a knowing that these things are changeable, right? Like when we come together in the midst of a mess of a thing and are tuned to our power, we can change the harsh realities that we face day to day. So, this is page 106. A turning point arrived on September 20th, 1970. Following the summer's successful Gay Pride Week and dances at NYU, the Christopher Street Liberation Day organizers requested to return to the NYU venue for 4 additional gay dances. NYU's campus was located in the heart of Greenwich Village and seemed a natural place to organize. When NYU administrators found out about the planned dances, they canceled them, fearing that gay culture surrounding NYU on all sides would somehow seep into the whole student body. The outcry was immediate. Less than an hour after finding out about the administration canceling the dances, students at NYU decided to occupy the hall for a sleep-in. They invited members of the gay community to join them, regardless of whether they were enrolled or not. Bob Kohler told Sylvia Rivera that NYU was cracking down and she wasn't having it. Marsha, Sylvia, their friends Bubble, Bambi, and Endora, and others walked into the air-conditioned NYU student building, Weinstein Hall, which stood just north of Washington Square. NYU, they knew, didn't just regulate gay life and student population. They also operated Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital, where Marsha and many others in the queer community had long experienced homophobia, transphobia, and racism. Each time I'm in Bellevue, they try to kill me, Marsha explained. They fill me up with Thorazine. The first thing the street queens did was wash their hair and wash their clothes in the matron's bathroom sinks and take showers. They used paper towels to dry themselves off in the chilly basement before applying their makeup and venturing out to the common room in the basement to meet the students. Sylvia wore a beautiful blue dress with puffed flowers. She had been growing out her hair, and it was now nearly reaching her shoulders. Even though the NYU administration had turned up the air conditioning to force people out, students sent extra blankets to the freezing activists. The first night of the Weinstein Hall takeover was a ball. A few of Sylvia's friends from the gay activist group Gay Liberation Front bought some records, and the students liberated the sound system from the locked closet, and everybody got down. Barriers between the street queens and cis lesbians began to fall apart as everyone started to mix together, get high, drink coffee, play cards, and, surprisingly, spin the bottle. The Gay Flames newsletter reflected on the utopic nature of the sit-in. All kinds of us together, transvestites, middle-class people, people used to passing for straight, black, whites, Latinos, street people, students. A lot of barriers and tiers were broken down. We were building together, in love, together, strong and proud and together. Although they weren't NYU students, Marsha, Sylvia, Bubbles, Bambi, and Endora had been responsible for cleaning the space, fundraising, and cooking food. Nearly 10 years later, Sylvia recalled with joy in her voice, Marsha would go out and hustle every night. Every morning, she'd come in with a coffee and a Danish and everything for everybody. She'd sleep there a while. She says, "I'm going home to change, girlie. I leave you in charge." These acts of care foreshadowed her later role of mothering over the years. Marsha loved inhabiting the role of mother, caring for young queens and supporting their development. She saw the street queens, including Sylvia, as her children. They, in turn, looked to Miss Marsha for mothering. As my friend Leah Lakshmi wrote in the book Care Work, in detail about the meaning of this kind of gender disability labor, far too often the emotional labor work we do as femmes or femme people is not seen as labor. It's seen as air. It's that little thing that you do on the side, not real organizing, not real work, just talking about feelings and buying groceries, girl stuff, femme stuff, disabled and sick stuff, not real activists holding a big meeting stuff. Those things are not a sideline or an afterthought to our movements. They are our movements. Marsha and the girlies modeled their food service after the Black Panther Party's community food programs. And I'm going to skip ahead and just to end here. Marsha shared their radical outlook, saying, "I'm a revolutionary. I believe in picking up the gun." She connected her desire for liberation with the self-defense ideology of the Black Panther Party and other mass movements at the time. Inside NYU, Marsha, Sylvia, and Dora and Bubbles began to bring about a vision they had years ago when they were homeless and staying in hourly hotels. They had dreamed of a radically changed world where they were free to be themselves and could live in dignity. At the time, we lived at the Arista Hotel, Sylvia explained. We used to sit around, we'd just try to figure out when this harassment would come to an end. And when we would always dream about it, that one day it would come to an end. And we prayed and we looked for it. We wanted to be human beings.
Thank you. So I love getting that grounding in the book, which is incredible. And as you can tell just from that short reading, has so much detail, so many characters beyond Marsha, so much richness, so much archival research, so many connections. Before we get into more about the book and how it came about, though, do you want to lead us through these great pictures?
Yeah, so I just brought a handful of slides, some of my favorite photos. I'm going to stand up just so I can see them better. So this first slide is from Randy Wicker's collection, and it's of Marsha around Christmas, 1988, and she would call her looks her treatments, and so she's giving, Christmas ornament treatment, and
I love the candy cane.
Right, with the candy canes and the kind of lacquered lights atop, and if you look closely, there's a Santa, and they were taken at Randy's lighting store, Uplift Lighting, which really became a center for community once Marsha got there. And so this is just I remember when I was writing about Marsha on WordPress, many years ago, over a decade ago, this was the image that I kept coming back to. And yeah.
You see the next one?
This is really one of my favorite, it's so moving. So Sylvia left New York and left the movement in the early 70s, extremely burnt out and surviving a lot of violence, both in the movement and on the street, and yet would continue to show up and show out at Pride with Marsha. And there's this understanding of the sisterhood between Marsha and Sylvia, and there was a lot of spaciousness over the decades after the 70s, but this photo just is so touching to me. They had such, Marsha met Sylvia when Sylvia was 12 or 13 and was hustling in Times Square. And Sylvia said Marsha plugged in the light for her, and it just is so, I don't know, this is so moving for me, this photograph. So, yeah. These are two of my favorites. So after Marsha's husband, Thomas Gerald Davis, died in the Lower East Side, Marsha had a breakdown, and she was someone with multiple forms of disabilities and frequently had breakdowns. And in one of these breakdowns, she communed, she explained, with a spirit named Oxygen, Oxygen, Oxy, Oxy. And Oxy, Oxy was a woman, Marsha said, who told her to always turn up her looks during Pride, and she would never have the same look twice. And so to me, it is like the emergence of Marsha all the way dialed up are her Pride looks. And this one, they're both Christopher Street, and, the Christopher Street Parade Day Fair happening at the end. And I have a beautiful lithograph of the one on the left at home that a friend did. And so, yeah, I don't know. They're just, to me, they're really compelling. Marsha's in front of St. Veronica's Church right there, which is a Catholic church, but was also a place that people were doing organizing during the emergence of the HIV/AIDS crisis. And Marsha would stand on the steps and do candlelight vigils, and then take the candles and drop them in the Hudson River just at the end of this street. And I moved to New York when I was 19, and I just spent so much, this is the early 2000s, so much time in front of both of these buildings, because, they're really just right next to each other. But, yeah, so. This is also one of my favorites, Marsha on the pier. This is after Marsha moved in with Randy. Marsha was a lover of animals, as we're going to hear more in the audio that I'll play, and took care of Randy's dog. And then also, Marsha was living with a bullet in her back. She was shot right across the street from where this photo was taken in 1981, and lived with a bullet in her back for about 11 years. And to me, it's about that kind of chironic place that both is a site for violence, but also has the seeds of powerful liberation, those that both of them are happening all the time. And yeah, I really love, Marsha, to me, is giving like high key Virgo in this photo. So yeah.
One thing I love about this photo, for those of you who don't know, Leonard Fink is an incredible documentarian of the piers and culture in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And you can go and see his photos at the LGBT Center Archives anytime. They're not well known, but up there with Alvin Baltrop, I'd say they're two of the best documentarians of the piers.
And, Marsha had a friendship with Alvin Baltrop, and there's some footage of kind of the Pride 1992 where Marsha's like hanging out in Union Square, and then all of a sudden she's like, "Hey, Al!" And it doesn't, it's not explained that it's Alvin Baltrop, but he's there, and they just, he's like, "Oh, they have me photographing everything," and it's just so beautiful. He took one of my favorite photos of Marsha. So yeah. Yeah, so this book wouldn't exist, and my knowledge of Marsha wouldn't exist without places like the Center Archive. And so to me, it's really important to, name all of the centers of like care for our histories. I love Marsha giving flower child girl in this, and yeah, I love the flowers in her hair.
Is that a Gay Activist Alliance flyer?
Yeah, exactly.
So
GAA, cool. Yeah. So this is, I read a bit about Bellevue, right? I just think that this is just one of the most iconic photos of Marsha, with the cigarette in her hair and the fake fur coat, and she was so deeply informed by the Black Panther Party. And part of the reason why I started writing about Marsha in the first place in like 2004 and 2005 is because I wanted to make sure that we all understood. I had this professor, Robin D.G. Kelly, who was my thesis advisor in college. He wrote this incredible book, Freedom Dreams, amongst many others. And I just really wanted to share how I understood, and so many of us understood, that Marsha was integral to the Black freedom movement, right? And so it set me on this path of like tracing Marsha and the Black radical tradition.
That's great. That's the last one, right? Or
Yeah, I think
one
that's the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Awesome.
Oh no, there's
Oh,
one
oh,
more. One more. Okay, this is
Psych.
honestly, this is such an iconic one. 1973, on their way to Washington Square Park. You can see a little bit of Sylvia wearing that iconic one piece, which I later found out is lavender. And so, how many people have seen the clip, Y'all Better Quiet Down? Right. So Sylvia's wearing that one piece. It's a lavender one piece. And it's actually one of their sisters, right, who was from Philly, was part of Star, and died. And Sylvia and Marsha went to they didn't know who this dear one's family was. So they went, but they knew that the person lived in Philly. So they went to like every single hair salon in this neighborhood in Philadelphia, searching for this person's family to let them know. And then Sylvia wore that like iconic look during the Pride Parade. Bambi Lamore was an OG Star member who was incarcerated. It's so important to me. I came up in a movement that was making connections between the policing happening outside of our community and also the real conditions for transgender nonconforming people, all people living in prisons and jails and detention centers and psychiatric hospitals. And so to see the architects of the movement, saying these things like, alongside saying things like, NYU should be free and people should have free childcare, and in the 70s talking about gender affirming care in the same manifesto as health, as jails and prisons. To me, it's like, it's so powerful. And also, she looks incredible. So many of these looks are also aligned with her performance in this group called the Angels of Light, which was a downtown scene that she was a performer in. So, yeah.
Oh, these are so great and so inspiring. I love this free all gays from all jails.
Exactly.
I think we can get behind that.
That's
and then
right.
everyone else, too.
Yeah,
We'll start
exactly.
there. So you touched on this a little bit, and we were talking a little bit about it backstage, too. But the importance of lineage and ancestors. How did Marsha first come into your life?
So I was 19 in 2002, and I moved to New York, and I immediately, something in my head was like telling me to go to Christopher Street. And I remember I like brought my mom, and we kind of walked along Christopher Street, and I was like going to then she left, and I was like going to the piers. And it was in those spaces I joined this group called Fierce that was, people familiar with Fierce? Yes, okay. And we were organizing around the piers, and at the time, New York City was trying to push this curfew, not for everyone, but for queer, transgender, nonconforming people of color who were young hanging out. And we were like, this is not going to happen. So we like went and we took over community board meetings and had large-scale protests and marches. And it was in those spaces that I started to hear about Marsha. And Fierce created a really wonderful documentary called Fenced Out that Sylvia is in. And so I just started asking questions like, who is this person that everyone knows and is talking about with such reverence? And then I slowly got to, meet her family from Elizabeth, New Jersey, her nephew Al Michaels and her sister Jeannie Michaels and her brother Bob, who are just such incredible people. And so it just was a little by little wanting to share what I've learned. So I used to work at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, and we had a newsletter for our incarcerated members. And I would write, this is what I'm learning about Marsha today. And they'd be like, girl, we knew Marsha. Let us tell you something. And I'd be like, please. Because part of what it is especially at that time, isolation was a real thing and continues to be in our community. Isolation because of jails and prisons and detention centers. Isolation because of the very real violences that were happening outside. So to me, it was part of this work that I was wanting to do of connect the dots, right? Connect the dots between Marsha and the Black Panther Party, connect the dots between Marsha and performing, connect the dots between all that and what is now, which is so alive. And that's a little bit about how I started.
You know, I think I, like a lot of historians and scholars, have depended on the research that you've done. I used your blog, the Rapping with the Street Transvestite that you put up that you could find nowhere else. And so this work, you've been doing it and connected to Marsha for so long. What made you think now was the time for a book? What made you do this now?
So to me, it felt really important to have all of this in one place, right? All of these aspects of Marsha as artist, as a fashion leader, as an activist, as someone who's a Jersey girl, right? Like Elizabeth, New Jersey. As a spiritual leader, so much of her care work came from a deep understanding and a relationship with God and the saints. Sylvia taught her about, praying to the saints. And to me, there were so many wonderful aspects, like all of us in the room, right? We all have those wonderful aspects of who we are, and it felt so important to bring them together so that we'd really understand in a cohesive way the brilliance of Marsha.
And how has it been with this political moment with bringing the book out now?
Yeah, I mean, we are really in the midst of a mess of a thing, right? Like,
You heard it here.
you didn't need it, you literally. Breaking news. I mean, you can't open a screen or go outside or talk to a loved one without knowing that we're really in the midst of a mess of a thing. And to me, it is not much different from how Marsha navigated those moments, right? Like when Marsha was coming up, she moved to New York as an 18-year-old in 1963. And when she was coming up, you would be arrested and put in jail if you as a trans person were going outside and expressing who you were. Sylvia Rivera, in an interview with Steve Watson, who is a really incredible archivist of our history, this is in 1979, talked about they used to hang out in Times Square, right? And the police would back the paddy wagon truck up to Bickford's, which was the diner that they would all hang out in, and just load everyone in. It was intense. It was harsh. Marsha wasn't putting a happy face sticker on those problems, but she was also saying, it's really important for us to gather together like we are in this room right now. So she would rent these hourly hotels. They used to call them hot spring hotels. And that's because whether it was winter, spring, summer, or fall, the rooms were boiling in Times Square. But in those, they would start to, in that Robin D.G. Kelley sense, freedom dream. They would look at the harsh condition and ask themselves, well, we know what we don't want. What do we want? What fresh new desire is being inspired by this reality right now? And so to me, that's a real lesson for this moment. What fresh new desires are being inspired by the current political situation that we're in? And for Sylvia and Marsha, it was a freedom, a sense of freedom. How do we feel a keener understanding of our beauty, of our value, of our power, of our freedom? And then they knew it wasn't going to happen overnight. They started dreaming in the 60s, and they took over Stonewall at the end of that. And then they also took over NYU, and then they started Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. It was a consistent unfolding, and they were holding a vision without immediate evidence that it could come true. And so to me, that's also really important.
Yeah, and I love that. Yeah. I love that concept of freedom dreaming, which I learned about through your work. So tell us a little bit about the research process generally. Like, how did you find all of this stuff, and what were some of the most exciting things that you came across? I
mean, I just have to say I'm such a beneficiary of so many people who came before me who were holding the light of Marsha P. Johnson and tending to her archive, whether it was in their living rooms or their basements or in formal places like a library or a center. To me, this book and so much of the work that I've done around Marsha would not have happened without their generosity, too. And so, and at the same time, it was, at least in the beginning, when I was starting to piece together an understanding of Marsha, it was more dispersed, right? So the writing process, like I started writing this book, I had made a film about Marsha and was writing about her for a while, but this current version of the book, I started writing in 2020. And so, I don't know, it took me on so many beautiful roads of like learning about Marsha as an LA girly, right? She had this whole LA chapter, and also as an international performer. I don't think I totally understood how important performance was to her until I was really hot on the heels of she was doing 2 performances a day. And she was doing that in part because she knew that art changes the world and changes how we feel about ourselves. And that changes the world in turn. It gives us access to a greater sense of clarity to change a problem into a solution. So to me, I didn't fully understand that in the kind of depth that I do now.
For those of you who are interested in some of Marsha's performing history, there is a whole panel going on at NYU this week about the Hot Peaches, which we'll hear a little more about in a moment, but was one of the venues through which she performed.
Exactly.
And you brought some audio tonight that we can listen to.
Yeah, so I brought some audio. It's of Marsha, Sylvia, Bambi, who is right here on the poster being advocated for her freedom, and Endora and this journalist Arthur Bell, and they went to WBAI in the 70s, and they were talking about how they were evicted from their home, Star House, and Marsha's lover had just been killed, Thomas Gerald Davis. So the audio is about Marsha kind of grappling with her lover dying, but also with how they offer care beyond humans. That one of the favorite photos was of Marsha and her dog. And so this audio is about the care that existed in Star and how we can use that, knowing that that kind of care is so important right now. So, content warning, there is talks about death and killing in the New York Police Department, and also, some loving understandings about their relationships with animals.
Oh, I don't mind. I lost my lover, he got shot in March. He was on drugs and he went out to get some money to buy some drugs, and he happened to pick up an off-duty patrolman.
Pig.
And he was robbing him to get some money to buy some drugs, and he got shot in the heart and died instantly.
Was that in the neighborhood, Marsha, that happened?
Yes, on First Avenue and 2nd Street. And I'm still sending money, to see that his funeral's paid for and everything.
How were you able to cope with this, Marsha? Were you able to get over it in good time?
Oh, I haven't gotten over it yet. But I'm struggling.
He said that you lost a dog? Can you tell me about that?
Yes, my lover saved this dog's life. And the dog was staying with us after he died, and I was taking care of the dog, and I let him out one morning. And this man backed up on him and left him in the middle of the street. And lesbian sister that was staying with me, she put the dog in a box. And I called the ASPCA to have the dog removed, and they told me if I didn't have $10, that they wouldn't move the dog, and I didn't have any money, so I had it buried in the backyard at 213 East 2nd Street.
One thing that is very noticeable to me with all of the people that I know who are in Star is a kindness among themselves and a kindness to animals. The few times that I've been over at the house, the place has been literally running with dogs. And it seems as though almost everybody who's lived there has had at least 2 puppies. Does anybody want to talk about the love of animals, Star's love of animals? Butchie, do you want to say something?
Well, I myself, I like animals a lot, you know, especially dogs, because like puppies and older dogs, they seem like they have so much sense, you know. And they, when you talk to them, if you holler at them, it seems like you really hurt their feelings, you know. And they cry, just like little children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, animals don't put you down like people put you down. You know, like there can be real affection between an animal. You don't have to worry about an animal really turning on you like your friends and like the other people in the community. Well,
Your animals don't judge you.
that's about it. Thank you.
Sylvia, there's a great deal of affection with you and the dogs the times that I've been there. It's almost as though the dogs were adopted children. There's a great deal of love between you and the animals.
Well, before I had the last 2 puppies that I just had that were given to me by Marsha from her litter that her dog had, I had another dog. I had to give it away when I joined the movement and came to the streets and Star formed. And I feel that many of us that have taken care of the puppies and taken dogs and stray cats into the Star house is that the need that most of us do love children and we want to have children of our own, and since it's impossible at this time and no way a doctor can make us have children, being males dressed as women, that we give our love to animals.
You know, Marsha, just getting back to your relationship with your lover just for a minute. What sort of relationship was it?
We were married, husband and wife.
Always good to get more Marsha.
That's in the name of God, right?
Odd place to end there. Since they brought it up in the clip, can you tell us a little bit about Star and Star House?
Yeah, so STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, was started in that basement of New York University because Sylvia and Marsha and Bambi and Endora had a keen awareness that the other groups that sprung up after the Stonewall Uprising weren't as fiercely advocating for their community. Street queens, they would call themselves, like people who were doing sex work, people of color. And so they launched this desire, this dream to build an organization for themselves. About 10 years after Stonewall, Sylvia was reflecting to Steve Watson about, you know, those dreams were concretized, but they were also fleeting. They had a dream to start a healthcare clinic and start a bail fund, because bail, as it is today, is so important between the ability to be in confinement or not, right? And they also had a dream of starting a school and having a doctor. And so some of those were realized, right? They organized bail funds and they fought for access to gender-affirming care. One of my favorite interviews is also from WBAI, Marsha talking about being on gender-affirming care, being on estrogen, and the incredible changes that's happening to her body. And it was alive. It was a fleeting but powerful moment, like so many moments in that lineage of social movements are, where they had a house, people could stay, they would collect rent, they would organize together. They were deeply inspired by the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords. They would show up at protests with the star banner that Marsha had sewn, and an incredible organization.
Yeah, I mean, they did such incredible work. And I urge people, if you're today thinking about where you can get involved, in what way, bail funds are always an incredible thing to do. It's necessary. There are so many of them. They need money every single day, and the work makes immediate change. And Marsha saw that, you know?
That's right.
I want to switch gears a little bit, because I think if people know about Marsha, they mostly know about her political history.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, she has this incredible history as both an artist and a muse for the arts.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that side of her?
Yeah, so Marsha was actively involved in performance life in New York City. She was in two groups. One was called the Angels of Light, that split off from the Coquettes, and they would have open performances. So if you went to rehearsal, you could be a member of the Angels of Light. Marsha knew that she was too good for a rehearsal, so she just walked on stage mid-performance, and they really loved her, and the audience responded because the stage allowed her to really be the fullness of who she was. And people were craving that kind of emotional experience, that deep resonance with someone like Marsha channeling so powerfully. And then also she was part of the Angels of Light. So she was doing 2 performances a day starting in 1972 in, in venues that still exist today. And so, and that was a real part of who she was. And then she tried out for this film called The Happy Hooker in 1974. It came out, and the producer was telling her, yes, you're going to be in it. Come to the audition. It's just a formality. And she got there, and they were like, not into it at all. Not into her look, not into what she was giving. They said, they said, don't call us, we'll call you. And direct Marsha quote. And then what happened was she marched down to Andy Warhol's office and told him to take her portrait for Ladies and Gentlemen. And so that relationship is so complicated and fraught, right? Like that photograph went on to sell for so much more than Marsha ever received. And at the same time, Marsha going there was part of her listening to that voice in her head that was leading her to further and further moments of self-actualization. And that's what made up also her performance.
One of my favorite moments that you mentioned in there about the hot peaches and her performance, and and I think really shows her instincts for this, is that she would always do these like somewhat improvised. She would go into characters and sing, and was it Jimmy or one of the other performers, Jimmy, who at one point said, stay on script, sing the right notes. So the next night she does that, and nobody likes it as much as they like the way that Marsha did it, because she knew how. Yeah, she knew how to control a room, how to make people laugh, how to make people feel. I love that the subtitle of the book is The Joy and Defiance.
That's right.
You start with the joy, I think, is really critical. And along those lines, this is a book about Marsha, but it's a book about the joy and the defiance and the community that she was part of, that she was a leader in, the sisterhood, the movements. She didn't do it by herself.
That's right.
Are there other folks that you want to bring into the room from this history, other people that we should know as well as we know Marsha?
Yeah, I mean, she was born into a beautiful family that still is working around her legacy and issues in Elizabeth, New Jersey, the Michaels family. And they're organizing to make sure that the city of Elizabeth is recognizing Marsha, and that young people know their history and know Marsha. I mean, there's so many. Augusto Machado, who's a performer and a dear one to me, was so generous in terms of, Augusto met Marsha during the World's Fair in New York, right? And so that was quite a while ago. And was just, mothered by Marsha. And so, there's also Randy Wicker, who Marsha moved into Randy's apartment, and he so consistently holds our history and so generously shares it. Larry Mitchell, who wrote The Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions, started a documentary about Marsha with Rick Morrison and Mike Cassino, Tony Nunziata, and that offers so much information and insight about Marsha. There's so many people in this audio. We get to hear Bambi Lamore and Endora, different moments, who aren't with us in their bodies in the same way, but their spirits remain. So yeah.
Yeah. For those of you who are familiar with The Faggots and Their Friends Between the Revolutions, there's going to be, I believe, an opera based on it at the Armory, right? Yeah, later this year. So definitely check that out. There's also a great documentary about the Lavender Hill Commune, which Larry Mitchell also founded and did incredible work here in New York, in the East Village, and also in Ithaca. So, just to this is a tiny slice of the many people whose lives Marsha intersected with, the many movements, the many moments, all of which are contained in this incredible book. And in a moment, we're going to open this up to questions for you. But we've got one last kind of like big question, which is, we touched on this a little bit, the political moment that we're in right now. And Marsha, as an inspiration, as an icon, I hate to ask this for any one person, but what do we do? And what lessons can we learn from Marsha about navigating this moment?
I mean, there's so many lessons that we can learn from Marsha, and I think that we're already enacting them, right? Like Marsha wasn't putting a happy face sticker. She was on the real problems. She was keenly aware of them. That's why she was renting those hourly hotels, to have relief from them. It's so important. She understood that in moments of harsh conditions, you step into the shade. It's like you're outside, the sun is inescapable, you don't have your sunscreen on, you step into the shade. So I think moments of relief and sanctuary and refuge are so important for us to gather together and start to imagine and enact those imaginings about what strategies are working, what aren't, what are our goals, I was a campaign organizer for a long time before I was doing art, and in the lineage of Marsha, we needed to be together to figure out the world together. And so that's a really important one. Marsha was also just so known for her generosity, that the bail funds, the mutual aid, the consistent care, also rest. It's so important, she talked about throughout her entire life, that burnout can really extinguish your energy. And when you're not plugged in, when you're not replenishing, that matters, right? And so rest and replenishment are a big part of her tradition. The disability justice model that she offered, right? Where she was a person navigating multiple disabilities, but knew that her acts of change changed the world. She helped start the first ever AIDS walk in Los Angeles, right? And was doing that work here. And so to me, she was a person who understood theories of change in a very deep way, and also, understood shifting our interior condition is as important to shifting a policy or shifting and dismantling a structure. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that disability justice angle that you bring to this story and that Leah Lakshmi does is so important and so rarely brought up in the context of Marsha's experiences. And I think it's one of the many really important interventions that this book makes into both history and the current moment of political organizing. So we're going to open it up to you all. We've got a great crowd here tonight, so the one thing I would ask is that if you have something that's more of a comment or not really a question, if you could save that to talk to us maybe afterwards when we're doing the signing, and really save this moment for asking questions that the audience can benefit from your learning. Got one right here. I think we've got someone with a mic coming to you. Yeah.
We have one here.
Nope.
Oh. Hi, thank you for being here. So, in the context of the intersection of mothering and also holding space for different frameworks, like you mentioned, there was a lot of inspiration pulled from the Black Panther movement. What does togetherness look like when we're so divided within our own communities, whether it's an understanding of racial differences or racial inequities within the queer community, and then also what would Martha's framework be for that or for remedying that?
Yeah, I mean, Marsha was navigating so many divides when she was organizing, right? So after the 1969 Stonewall Uprising, a lot of groups sprung up, the Gay Liberation Front, the Gay Activist Alliance. And in that moment that I read a little bit about in 1970, there were real divisions, right? So sometimes people like Marsha were made to feel very uncomfortable showing up at one group. Marsha also knew it was really important, they called it rapping, right? To rap together, to dream and in that Fred Moten sense, to speculate and ask the same questions over and over and over again in order to arrive at a fresh new strategy, a deeper insight. And so she took real risks. During the occupation, they were trying to get different groups that had shaded her and marginalized her involved. And some of them didn't show up at all. And then others did, and they started to bridge across difference. And that didn't stop. Marsha, in those moments, also understood it's so important to bridge across difference, and also it's so important for us to start an organization for ourselves. And the two can coincide, right? That's why they started Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, because they knew that they could be the best advocates for themselves. And so to me, those are really the lessons, right? Those are the strategies of coalition building and also strategizing about, well, what are our specific needs that we know the best ways to go about getting them, whether it's housing in an apartment, whether it's access to health care. All of these things are so still relevant today, whether it's bail and arrests or ICE and detention. All of these things that are alive that we're facing today have their roots in so long ago, but also in what Marsha was navigating. So to me, that question that you're asking is just so timely. It's so important. And Marsha's a model, right? She did not just one strategy, she tried them all. And she took breaks when she needed to. So, yeah. Thank you for that question.
And I think since you were talking about the Black Panthers and divisions within sort of the queer movement back then, one thing I always like to highlight is that the Gay Liberation Front, the first group to get founded after Stonewall, was founded in order to support incarcerated leaders in the Black Panther Party in the Women's House of Detention, Afeni Shakur and Joan Bird. And in fact, when the Gay Activist Alliance split off from them a year later, it was because they had given a $1,000 donation to a bail fund for the Black Panthers. And the Gay Activist Alliance felt that they should be a single issue, gay issues only, as though Afeni Shakur and Joan Bird were not incarcerated queer women who were leaders in the movement. So these struggles and interconnections have always been there.
That's right, yeah.
I think we had a question here.
Would you speak a little bit about her presence, not just in the New York community, but in the West Coast and also internationally, if
Absolutely.
there was?
Yeah. So I mentioned this really briefly, but Marsha had such a big life in Los Angeles. She would mother people, from 18 years old when she met Sylvia in Times Square. One of the people that she mothered was this street queen named Jamie, who then moved to California and to Calabasas. And I went to the house that Marsha lived at when she stayed with Jamie, and it's in Calabasas, and there's like this massive olive tree that is in front of it. And Marsha was doing a lot of different things there. She was going to different gardens. She was going to beauty school. She was organizing around HIV and AIDS and starting an AIDS walk that still continues to this day. So it was this. There's an interview of her from, I think, 1989 in the One Archives, which is in Los Angeles. It was just so beautiful to see Marsha. She's in beauty school in this moment, and she's talking to the interview about, how she can help his look a little bit. And it's just this other side of Marsha that comes out, And so I did a talk there a couple weeks ago, and there were two friends of Marsha that were there, John O'Brien and Gary Legault, who knew Marsha from here, and they would both see Marsha, and host her, just hanging out, having a ball, but also organizing. And so it was really all of it. It was a really big life that she was living. And then also she traveled to London, and members of the Hot Peaches helped her get a passport in Newark. And then in February of 1991, she went to London. She was just so excited about it. She was telling everyone, and she performed at Drill Hall, which is now the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, RADA Studios. And it was legendary, and she got tons of press coverage. And in these moments, Marsha just is the fullness of herself, and it so transcends time. So, yeah, thank you for that question.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Wilbur, and I would like to ask, I know you've talked about the division within the LGBTQ community back then, and that it still exists today. While I am cisgender, I am gay and feel like the rainbow is the best thing.
Yes.
But how do you feel, Tourmaline, about the division? How do you handle when gays are separated from trans, when we put down bisexual people, when we draw those lines, color lines as well? How do you handle that, and how do you think Marsha would handle that now?
Yeah, I mentioned Larry Mitchell, who wrote The Faggots and Their Friends, and in one of their interviews with Marsha, she was talking about bisexuals advocating for themselves to be included at the LGBT Center and in Pride. This was June 1992. And she said, well, I stayed, they were planning the march, and she was talking about how she stayed after because no one was listening to bisexual people advocating for themselves and advocating to be part of Heritage of Pride. And so Marsha's lineage and her legacy is one of making sure that she is listening and growing and being an expansive leader rather than a reductive leader. And I get to be the beneficiary of all of that knowledge and all of that action. I was part of a group called Queers for Economic Justice, and we were advocating for welfare for our community, for changing New York State's Medicaid laws. This was 15 years ago. But to include, access to gender-affirming care. And it was and then the Medicaid provisions was repealed, and now it's, still under a constant threat, but more and more people are able to access gender-affirming care. It was a successful campaign because our entire community showed out and showed up, right? And so I think Marsha knew the power of that kind of togetherness and that kind of openness to hear a perspective that wasn't hers, but she wanted to understand more deeply, whether it was people who were bisexual advocating for themselves to be part of the parade. To me, I just am constantly taking notes from her around that. And then also noticing when she wasn't being respected and then going off and forming STAR, right? And knowing okay, we can have both. I can still be listening and meeting people where they're at. And if I'm not being treated with respect, I can start my own organization. And so I think that that's so timely, and the kind of care that she extended to other people, I truly inspire that our movements do that within ourselves. Yeah, so thank you for that question.
Hi. So while you've been talking, a line from a poem of yours at the Tate keeps echoing in my mind. It's easy to be soft. And we talk a lot about Marsha's ferocity and the ways that she shows up for herself and other people. But I'm wondering if through your years of research and just getting to know Marsha, if there are any moments of softness that really stick out for you.
Absolutely. Part of the, a little bit in the audio, if we kept going, she would be talking about her beautiful marriage with her husband and how she just had a gorgeous marriage, right? And it wasn't in number years-wise that long, but for her, it lived so long. And when her husband, Thomas Gerald Davis, died, she made this spiritual flower inside herself and cultivated it. She talked about a flower that lives forever as a flower inside of me. And that's a prayer that she was constantly saying. And she was getting into the receptive mode, right? Not the delivering mode, the receptive mode, where she could be at her best to receive those messages. She was constantly developing and cultivating a relationship with her spirits, with her ancestors, with God. And she talked about being in conversation with Jesus all the time. Those were receptive things. She was receiving those messages from a place of real softness and openness. The Los Angeles moment when she's in beauty school, it's just such an incredible moment too, because she was wandering gardens, taking buses. She was... That's quite
a spooky
season.
That.
I know, spooky season has arrived. So, yeah. No, I love that. That was so necessary. Yeah.
I think we have time for like one, maybe two more questions. Anyone else? Yeah.
I was just wondering what Marsha's birth order was and how you think that affected who she became or was.
Her
Like, was she the baby of her family? Was she
yeah.
the eldest? Was she forgotten middle?
She was more in the middle. So she had her mother, Alberta Michaels, had one child who was the eldest from a previous relationship, and then two children, and then Marsha, and then Norma, and then Marsha. Norma is Al Michaels' mother, and then Jeannie, who I've gotten really close to, and Bob towards the end. It's so interesting. Marsha talks less about her siblings in terms of her understanding of herself, but she talked a lot about her mother as forming a real understanding of herself, because, in a different WBAI interview, she talks about being able to do domestic arts because of her mother, right? She was like, I could cook, I could clean because of my mother. And then Sylvia's like, that's so repressive. And they're like figuring it out together. And Marsha said, well, my mom is a poor Black woman. She couldn't hire other people. She was doing all these things herself. They were having like two kind of parallel but different conversations. And so Marsha continued to talk about like mothering the girls in relationship to how her mother, and the relationship wasn't always easy. It was complicated for sure, but the lessons that she got from her mother. And then there were these moments where she would take like so many star girlies back to New Jersey, and her mother, even in a moment of kind of tension with Marsha, would, feed all of these street queens, right? Feed all the members of Star. Al Michaels talks about how Sylvia and Marsha were his babysitters and taught him how to play marbles and gave him life lessons. And so to me, and Jeannie Michaels, Marsha's sister, talks about, I opened the door and I saw 12 people. So I told my mother, like, you got to make sure you get food for 12 people because Marsha brought them. And it was this like unexpectedness of it all, So yeah, that's a really wonderful question.
Last one. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So thank you both. And it was such a gift reading this book. To read, I realized as I was reading it, you give so much context on the civil rights movement in Elizabeth as it's happening, and I realized that what we are getting is a kind of narrative of trans girlhood alongside civil rights narratives of biography that we get a lot of. And I'm wondering if you can speak to maybe narratively what guided you to write this very specific childhood history and what you hope to see in memoirs or biographies of trans girlhood in the future, if there's kind of stories that we would like to see that might be inspired by the one that you tell.
Yeah, I think that trans girlhood stories are so represented in terms of books like this. I remember when Janet Mock's book first came out, Redefining Realness, and that had such a huge impression on me, and we were friends, and I heard many of the stories, but just reading it in book form, there's something about like the ways that books work inside of me that really alters how I see myself and the world. And so that part really was inspired by so many people, like Janet's writing and Janet's book. And it was really important to offer a model of like trans girlhood from a time that wasn't from the time of the 40s, right? Where also Elizabeth, New Jersey had a very real underground queer trans scene, right? There was this tavern that called Billy's Tavern that I was reading these New Jersey liquor agents reports, and I wish I had enough more space to write about them, because the agents were simultaneously being super enchanted with the performances and the people, while also having to write it in such a way where they were like, this is wrong, but you could tell they were really living for it, And so that's a whole other book. And so, yeah, I wanted to make sure that we knew that Marsha had a really textured, rich childhood with relationships that continued to this day. And yeah, that was that. So thank you for that question. Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end it, because that's what I think I am most. This book takes Marsha from a name that people maybe knew or a face they had seen to someone with a rich and textured life and thoughts and history and future. And it's all thanks to you, because you have been beating this drum for like 20 years. And it is incredible to see this book finally here in reality, and everyone in this room tonight here to celebrate, yes, Marsha, but also you. So thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause?